Hello folks, welcome to our Dice Tower preview. I'm Mark.
And I'm Randy.
Today we're taking a look at Heropath.
Heropath is brought to you by BGD. Each game takes 1 to 2 hours to play and supports 2 to 4 players, with additional players being provided by the expansions.
Well, let's go experience high adventure.
Before venturing into the world of Heropath, each player will be given their own player board to track various aspects of the character they will be playing. The base game provides 4 character types: the warrior, the elf, the sorcerer, and the dwarf, with the expansions also providing the wizard and the giant. Now, these player boards allow you to track the attributes of each character, as well as their armaments and their resources. The characters differ in the attributes with which they start the game, and also the amount of food and gold that they are initially given. As players venture through the world of Heropath, they'll find opportunities to discover new places, to fight monsters and also other players, and ultimately to engage the dragon itself. However, before they do, they'll want to work hard to improve their attributes, to gather better weapons, better armor, more powerful magic items, trusty companions, and also to develop specialized abilities that only they will have.
Exactly. You know what's neat here is that you truly get the sense of developing your character in this game. And the player boards are big and beautiful.
They are.
And I love player boards. So it really has some neat things going here. So I want to make a quick note about the player boards and the game board. Again, this is a prototype. Our version is very much a prototype, even though it looks very polished. The game board is about 15% larger here than it will be in the final version, and our player boards are somewhere around 10% larger. So those are some things to keep in mind. All right, now that you have your character, let's set up the board. You'll notice the board has varying types of terrain, and there are some specific icons in place. There's a settlement icon where you'll be putting places, and we'll get to that in a minute. And there's a wall icon, which is a safe zone. And then there's a couple other ways to travel. You'll place a ferry out into the river, which is a much faster way to move across the board. And there are hot air balloons that you can use and kind of be at the whim with a dice roll.
Yeah, whim of the wind. Yeah.
Right. And then you're going to put enemies out in their starting locations, and you will place the dreaded dragon. And finally, you're going to place all the character models on their starting position on the map.
Mark mentioned the settlement icons on the board, and at the beginning of the game you'll want to make certain that all of these place site markers, these little triangular prisms, are in the bag so that you can randomly grab one every time you land on one of these spaces. Now, the cool thing about these markers is that they are triangular prisms, and they're reminiscent of the kiosks you see when you're in the mall that let everybody on all sides see exactly what that site represents.
And they're also color-coded.
They are color-coded, so you know what type of a site that you're going to. And this is very useful when you're dereferencing the reference board for these sites, because every site has special actions that you can do at that location. Lastly, what you want to do before you start the game is to lay out the various types of cards along the bottom of the board. There are several types of cards. There are market cards, there are arms cards, there are abilities cards, and magic cards. Now, all 4 of those decks have some cards that are face up, which will allow you to choose amongst the visible cards. The last type of card is a fortune card, and that deck is all face down, because what you get, no one knows.
It's a fortune.
Yeah, that's right.
Also, to one side of the board, you'll notice the scale of evil. This area will be something that happens and takes place during gameplay. All right, now at the very start of the game, you're going to be drafting cards. And there's some unique things about how this draft works. Everyone's going to first get a market card, an arms card, a magic card, and 4 ability cards. You're going to be taking these cards and you're going to be drafting like you would normally expect, but there's a hitch.
There is, because initially you all take 1 card and pass the remaining 6 cards to your left, picking up 6 cards from your right. In this case, though, you take the card that you've got, and if you want to, you can say, well, I've changed my mind based upon the 6 cards in my hand. Right. I don't want that one anymore, so I'm putting this back in the hand, and I'm choosing 2 others. So now I'm keeping 2, passing them on, passing 5, receiving 5, and when I receive these 5, I can do that again. It's like, oh, wow, these are awesome, so I'm putting these 2 back in. but I'm choosing 3 to keep, and then I pass 4. And you continue doing that until you've kept 5, and you take the last 2 and you discard them.
And this really helps you give like some nice starting items and really to kick your character off for the adventure.
Now, it's very important to remember there are some types of cards that require certain attribute levels.
Yeah,
you might say, this is an awesome, awesome card, but my faith isn't high enough, or my experience isn't high enough.
And I definitely fell into that trap in our first game where I had some magic items. I'm like, oh, these are awesome. And then, oh, I can't use these for a while.
But you still might want to keep them because you say, my first goal to use this awesome weapon will be to go out and improve my attributes so that I can wield it or wear it.
Exactly. All right, so on your turn, each player is given 4 actions they can perform, but there are 5 possibilities of different things you can do. The first one we're going to look at is travel. Now, while traveling and moving across the land, you can move 1 to 4 spaces. And what's important about traveling is that while you're moving, you can drop and pick up items along the way, which is really nice. You don't have to wait till you stop moving, but you can do it in between and at the end or at the beginning, however you feel necessary.
And one of the nice things about the way the game is laid out is that some of these spaces are too small to actually drop the cards that represent the items that you're picking up or dropping. So the game has provided, the game designers have provided numbered tokens and numbered spots along one side of the board. So you can say, well, I'm dropping a bunch of stuff in this small space. I put a 1 token here, and in the 1 spot, I'll put this stack of cards that I've...
Yeah, it was pretty slick how that works.
It is.
Yep. And you can also use the ferry to move along the river. Now, that's a really quick way to move across the board. And the other way to move across the water or the river is to use the bridge. Now, there's also a hot air balloon, which can not all potentially may take you to not the place you were hoping it would, right? Because it's all based on dice rolls. Also, while traveling, you will encounter enemies. Some may be hidden, some may be not. But if you land on a spot with a hidden enemy, it will reveal. Now, if you move through spots with enemies that are hidden, then they stay hidden. However, if you try to move through spots with enemies that are visible, then you have to pay vitality to do so. And you will pay 1 vitality per enemy on that spot. Another possible action is visit. When you arrive at a space that has a settlement icon, you will then go to the black bag of places and randomly pull one out and place it on that spot. Now, if there's already one there, you can just visit it. The thing about visiting is that if there's an enemy there, you cannot visit the space until you deal with the enemy. And you can only visit that particular spot on your turn 1 time. You cannot go back and forth multiple times to get
on a turn. So it's once per turn.
Just once per turn. But all these places have something unique about them. They will give you magic. They will give you gold. They will give you food. They will give you new skills. This is how you train and build up your character. All right, let's take a quick moment to talk about some of these buildings. So again, as we've showed you, this handy sheet really shows what you need to find and use and get based on what you're trying to do. For me, one of the pivotal moments in the games that we played was that I was desperately looking for the Forest Imp, the Academy, or the Mages Guild to get wisdom. Because all 3 of these buildings will increase your wisdom. And I desperately needed to do that. But everything I pulled from the bag was not, it literally came down to these were the last 3 or 4 buildings, right? The thing is that it really added to the tension for me in the game. But every one of these buildings do something very different.
And I think that's the fact that you knew they existed and were looking for them. That's actually fairly thematic because you know your heroes could be saying, "I've heard tale of an academy."
Exactly.
And you get to each new settlement and you see the castle and the flags over the rise, and it's not. It's the witch's den. Oh, that's lame. Sort of thing. So the other thing I like about this is the fact that each of these places tend to have 2 actions you can do there, and one seems to be a little bit cheaper than the second one, which tends to be fairly expensive.
And it's quite varied. I mean,
yes, it is.
They don't feel samey at all. I mean,
they're all quite
a lot of variants, a lot of different neat things, and I think that's another thing that could be added to the game is more of those type of building, more different buildings down the road.
If a hero is in the same space as an enemy that has been revealed, that hero can choose to battle that enemy. The way battle is conducted is by taking an appropriate number of dice and adding to those certain modifiers. For the hero, he will take 2 yellow hero dice. Now these dice are the basic dice, but there are cards the hero can have that will allow him to upgrade them to 2 yellow dice with higher values, which are therefore more powerful. To the value that is rolled by the hero, he will add two other values. He will add first the total number of attribute points shown on his player card. That means for every circle under the attribute section that is covered by one of these transparent gems, he will get to add one more attack point. Lastly, he will add the value of any sort of points added by weapons or magic items or companions or so forth that he currently is wielding or using or wearing. For the enemy, what needs to be rolled for the enemy is determined in the lower right. Each enemy type has a specific number of dice he rolls, as well as an appropriate or corresponding value that he adds to that. Some enemies get to roll one red enemy die, others get to roll two. Once these are rolled, what he adds to that is the fixed value shown by the character type down here, as well as the highest valued space in the scale of evil. So in this example here, you see there the highest occupied space is 1, so for every attack by an enemy, he will add 1. Now, who wins, who loses? And I think it's pretty obvious whoever has the highest value will probably win, and that's the case here too. If a hero's attack has a higher value than the enemy's attack, the enemy dies and the hero gets an experience point. So that experience point comes in the form of one of these transparent gems, which he immediately must place on his board. Unfortunately, if his experience track is already full, he has to discard this. If the hero ties with the enemy, the hero is still victorious. He still gets the experience point, but unfortunately he loses 1 vitality. In the worst case, if the hero is defeated because his attack value is lower than the enemy's attack value, what happens is this: he loses a vitality, but he gets the opportunity to fight the enemy again in his next action. If he loses to the same enemy twice sequentially, the second time not only does he lose that vitality, but he also gains an experience. So there's an upside, because through his wounds comes greater experience, greater understanding of that monster. And so he does get that experience point, which once again he must place immediately. Additionally, because the enemy has realized how perseverant the hero is, the enemy chooses to flee, not far, but he moves to an adjacent space, and the player gets to determine which adjacent space that enemy moves to. If a hero is ultimately victorious against the enemy, the question we're all asking is, so what do we do with the body? Well, unfortunately, all the enemy's bodies have to go to the scale of evil. Every space in the scale of evil has a capacity of for the same number of dead enemy tokens as there are players. So for example, if there are 3 players, each space in the scale of evil can have up to 3 of these tokens there. As long as the tokens can be put in the current space, it should be. But if that space, the current space on the scale of evil, has reached capacity, then the incoming dead enemy token has got to be put in the next higher space. Now this does 2 things. First of all, it makes all future enemy attacks 1 point more difficult, because the scale of evil represents 1 more point of value. The second thing, though, is when a new space is occupied, and only when that first token is put in the new space, it triggers the dragon's turn. That means the dragon has somehow gotten wind that more of his minions have fallen to the heroes and has gotten restless. First thing he does is he finds a new place to roost, potentially a new place. But as he flies around, he also breathes fire on some unsuspecting heroes. What happens to represent this is the active hero, the one who defeated the enemy that got put in a new space in the scale of evil, rolls a dice. What this shows is the path that the dragon takes as he flies around. This is the dragon's dice, and you see on it different terrain types. So for every terrain type represented by this dice, heroes get attacked. Now, if they are in the safe spaces represented by the wall icons, they're shielded from that. They're also shielded from that if they're in the goblin cave. Otherwise, they all lose a point of vitality. So that must be done. The active player also gets to choose where the dragon ultimately rests. It can be the same space that he left from, or it can be one of 2 other spaces, because there are only 3 spaces on the board where the dragon can roost. Lastly, all players do the following 2 things. They take an enemy token discreetly and place it face down on the board, any place up to at least 7 places away from their current location. Likewise, they take one of these place site markers and they place that also at least 7 places away from their current location.
So, battles. pretty intense.
And they can be, but you get used to it and it goes pretty quickly. It took me longer to explain than you'll spend calculating the results.
And I think we found that to be true when we played. It really moves pretty quick.
It does.
Yeah. So that leads us into probably a next possible action that you will consider is resting. Resting is very important because you're going to gain vitality. You gain 1 by default. You just get a vitality for resting. Now, if you spend a food, you get a +2 more. So a total of 3 vitality.
But you can only do that once.
So you can only do that one time. Yep, you can't keep spending food and gaining vitality.
For a given turn.
For a given turn. And then, of course, you get to search. Well, search is pretty cool. You get this green die that you roll, and you can find in sorts of things. You get gold, food, or maybe treasure. So this is a really nifty little mechanic. Also, you can drop and pick up items just like you would normally in like traveling. So that's nice. And then you can also adjust items in your player board. And this is a good time to do that. And if you need to like re-equip something or equip a better item or something.
And that's really important because anything that you're just carrying in your equipment slot and not actually wearing or wielding doesn't come into effect when you're battling anyone.
And resting is the way to get those.
Right.
And then if there's a hero in your space, then you can trade with them as well, which might give you a new item that you could equip. So there's some neat things there. Now, of course, if there's an enemy in your space, you cannot rest. No. There's just no option. So you either need to flee, run away, or continue battling.
Right.
So there's some trade-offs there, but resting is really a critical role in all your possible actions.
The 5th type of action that you can perform is called encounter. Now, you don't actually battle other heroes. That would be bad, I guess. Yes.
It does kind of feel like you're battling.
It does kind of feel like you're battling because what an encounter involves, it typically is snatching, theft, or ambush. And let's talk about each of those things. I don't think I've done this. Next game. If you're in a settlement area, you can demand 1 food or 1 gold from the victim. That's because there are other people around.
And it's important to note that if you're at a wall, it's a safe zone.
You're safe.
None of this can happen.
So these actions cannot take place. Encounters cannot happen if you're in a safe space indicated by the wall icon or if there's an enemy present.
Correct.
So the first type of encounter is snatching, where if you're in a settlement, you can demand gold or food. If you're on a road area, you can do something a little bit more severe. It's called thievery, and that means you can demand food or gold or a card of the victim's choice.
The worst.
No, the worst. The worst is ambush.
Yes,
and what ambush involves is that you actually ambush the victim and sell them to the goblins. And that player is moved to the goblin
cave, right?
The goblin prison, which is the innermost square of the goblin cave in the upper right of the board, or upper left of the board, I'm sorry.
Seems unhealthy.
Now, it's probably very unhealthy there, knowing goblins. Now, the victim does have a little bit of recourse, though.
Right.
There is this dice, die, rather. It's the white die in the prototype.
I do love dice.
And you're going to love this because on 2 of the 6 sides, there are wings showing, which means you manage to escape the attack. But you still have to pay 1 vitality because of the struggle you're in.
Right.
So that is called an encounter. In general, if you're playing somewhat cooperatively, you wouldn't use that, but keep in mind that really only 1 player wins the game by defeating the dragon.
So, and I have to admit that when we played, we had my wife play with us, and I almost did this.
You almost did this? Oh, boy.
But I thought better of it.
Because he didn't want to sleep on the couch.
That's right. All right, so here we are. Finally, you've built your character up to where you can take on the dragon. Battling with this dragon is pretty much like any of the other enemies on the board.
It is,
but he starts with like a really high vitality, right? He's got a 15. He gets 2 dice,
2 red dice,
and then whatever the scale of evil is.
Yep.
So if you can try to get to the dragon earlier, it's better.
Yeah, but by the time you really are prepared, there's a good chance the scale of evil has ratcheted up.
Absolutely.
Especially since just getting to the dragon to fight him is going to involve taking damage.
Yep. And why do you take damage?
Well, if you notice, the 3 places that the dragon can roost on the board are surrounded by spaces with flame icons called flares. That's right.
And these flares do automatic damage when you land on the space next to the dragon, or even moving through them.
Yeah.
Every one you move through will cause you to lose vitality. So just getting to him can be a real challenge.
Right. Now, These flares are only active when the dragon is
On his
perched,
roost.
in the roost in that area. So if he's in the mountains, for example, those flares are active, but the other two places the dragon can land, those flares are not.
Right. But then battle proceeds much like what you talked about before. You're just going back and forth.
Right.
And again, if you have to run away, you're going to lose more vitality. And especially if you have to run away into a flare.
That's true.
Which you could just gone, toast on the way out.
So ending your movement to show up there and fight him, and he can only be fought from these spaces adjacent to his roosts, which all have flares on them. So just ending your first movement to get there is going to lose you 1 vitality. If you do not win against the dragon, you lose 1 vitality for losing against him, and another vitality for ending an action on the square with the flare.
With the flare.
And if you want to run away, like Mark said, you could lose a 4th vitality just from evading him. So
and then every flare spot that you have to run through, like I said, will cause you to lose more vitality.
So although the battle is similar to fighting other enemies, the fact is you need to be prepared because there's so much you have to go through to get there, and you might only get 1 chance.
It is, and it truly is an epic battle.
It is.
Right? So again, this has just been an overview. And we have to say that this is absolutely one of the most polished prototypes we have ever played.
Yeah, kudos to the makers of this. I mean, the figures, these little kiosks
just
here,
fantastic.
the dice, they did a great job. And
Really
obviously all the art and the player boards and the main board itself, they did a great job. So
And
kudos.
the game definitely feels very thematic, which is right up my alley.
Yep.
So really, there's a lot of things about this game that have great potential, I feel like. Yep. So if this looks like a game that might be of interest to you, I'm sure they would appreciate your support.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's it from us.
That's it.
All right, until next time, we'll see you at the table.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.